we're way late, is dispense with a few things. Welcome, everybody. We do not have a quorum, at least I've not been informed we have yet, but we can go through and have the manager updates before we go to public comment. Remember this, you don't have a chat function in all of this. Also remember to probably mute unless you're called upon to speak. That way we can move through, and I'll do a quick overview later. But with that, Ryan, do you want to go through your presentation?
Sure, and I'm going to cut a few of mine as well, because I have some things that we were going to display on the screen that we'll probably just work through it out, and that way I can share that with you at our next meeting. But there's a lot to cover, so I'm going to get through it quickly. Connect Oregon. Hopefully you all saw the September 16th email. ODOT is accepting the Connect Oregon grant applications. That's continuing until October 29th. Just as a reminder, it's $46 million in available grants for aviation, marine, and rail. Many of you remember it also used to handle some bicycle and pedestrian improvements as well as transit, but those are now shifted to other programs. So it's really just aviation, marine, and rail capital improvements. So we expect the OTC is going to be working on awarding those sometime middle of next year, May or July. So just keep that in mind. If you have more information, ask Chris. I'm sure we'll also be sending you some more emails. The FLAP program, the Federal Lands Access Program, there's a number of things that are going on with that, but it's basically related to accessing federal lands. And so we're applying for funds to finish the historic Columbia River Highway State Trail. That's our number one ranked application. It's trying to connect there at Hood River Ruthven Park, just west of the Columbia River Gorge Hotel. From there, a little bit to the east. We're also applying for the Multnomah Falls shuttle and continuing to serve with transit access out into the gorge, as well as the White River Bridge reconstruction alternative. This is looking at alternatives for the bridge that was washed out several years ago, and we're still having problems keeping that cleaned out. So we're looking at doing some engineering work with federal lands access funds. I would also say there's a restroom relocation grant that Travel Oregon, Hood River Mountain Forest District, as well as the Oregon Traveler Information Council, who actually has the permit and runs the restroom at the government camp right now, is applying to relocate that to a new location. We're supporting that, as well as an ITS toolkit to help give people more information about when and which spots are available at high demand park sites up on the mountain. So looking at snow parks and which ones actually have space available. The 24-27 STIP update, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Strategic Program has launched their online open house, and that's for projects for that program. And it's going to be on the open house is available until October 31st. We're looking for some more input as we look to update the next STIP cycle for that particular program. And then, of course, we have the rest of our STIP is still under the scoping phase. We have our 150% list up for most of the programs, and we're hoping to get down to our 100% list recommendations sometime coming up in the spring. The one that I will not spend much time on right now, but I will tell you, is that we do have an 82nd Avenue funding strategy. ODOT had to come up with $70 million in addition to the $80 million from the legislature and the $35 million that the city came up with in order to help fund that jurisdictional transfer. We're working with the city and trying to get our IGA signed January, this coming January, to get that transfer underway. And so we've identified the funding associated with that in terms of how ODOT's going to pay its $70 million share. And I will work with Chris and try to get that email out to you that shows how that funding is put together, so that we can help fund that. The Mount Hood Multimodal Transportation Plan is initiating its new phase. We originally built the plan in 2014 with ODOT's Forest Service, Clackamas County, and Hood River. We have a 15-year rolling plan, and so what we try to do is identify the next 5 years of projects that we expect to try to fund and implement, and so that work is kicking off here relatively quickly. You can reach out to Chris Ford if you're interested in more information on that. But we will be also trying to reach out and getting some information and some advice from key community representatives, as well as our stakeholder groups. The Oregon City Westland Bicycle and Pedestrian Concept Plan wrapped up in June. Or the City of Oregon City and City of Westland held a joint work session to talk about the adoption process for that concept plan. They had some great conversation, great discussion, and they're still working through that. They're going to be working through that with each of their councils, and hopefully in the next several months, adopting that into their TSP so that we can start looking for funding for the NEPA engineering and eventually some construction. Urban mobility, I just want to make sure you all are aware there's the Oregon tolling program is kicking off. More work. One of them is called Getting Us Out of a Jam, the Future of Congestion Pricing in the Portland metro area. That workshop is November 9th and 10th. There's an email that should have been in your inbox around September 28th inviting you to that. There's some work going on right now, also tying in the I-205 tolling funding with the I-205 project. There's a RTP amendment that's required for some of that. It already went to TPAC. There's a 45-day comment period on that. And we'll be discussing that more at JPAC, in addition to, I'm sure, hearing about it at our Act Plus tolling meetings. Good news for those of you who have been through our training programs on the Act before, we do not have to do that this year. The decision was made that the acts are no longer qualify for having to do that required training, so that's good news. We are looking for someone from the Act to be our Aviation Review Committee representative. So we need somebody to work with them in scoring the applications for the Critical Oregon Airport Relief Program. So if you are interested in participating in that program, could you please reach out to Chris Ford? And we would like to try to get that brought back for our next meeting. Hopefully have somebody who's interested and wants to be our nominee. We can prove that. And the last thing I'll say, even though I have a lot more, but I'm cruising through it for us here today. But I don't want to miss that October is Pedestrian Safety Month. These days, you're noticing it's getting darker out there earlier. It's foggy. 70% of fatal pedestrian crashes occur in the dark or in foggy conditions. So please be on the lookout for pedestrians when you're driving, and take care crossing the road when it's dark and foggy. Just being aware of your surroundings and knowing that this is a critical time of year to make sure that we're being as safe as possible, both as drivers and pedestrians. And with that, I will pass it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm trying to count those panelists that are here. I think we have a quorum.
You have a quorum. Yeah, you have a quorum. You have a couple of hands up. Mayor Snyder, as well as Commissioner Savas, have hands up. And then right now, Carrie is working to move people over, including Commissioner Nolan, over to being panelists. Sorry, we're working through it.
I know you're doing the best you can. I just want to make certain we had a quorum before we went too far. Jason, I see you have a hand up there.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Mr. Winsheimer if there are particular criteria that would be or skills that would be necessary or helpful in that aviation scoring request, or is it just anybody that can represent the Region 1 Act, or what's needed?
It really can be anyone who wants to represent the Region 1 Act. If you do have some aviation background or have airports in your districts or other things where you have some more awareness of what it takes to run those and how that grant program works, that's great. I can't remember who we had to do last year, but it was somebody who did an excellent job. And I know that the Port of Portland already has some representation and is participating in that separately. Otherwise, they would also be a good one. So maybe a county that's got some airports might be interested in doing that. So but I want to leave it open. So please just let Chris know if you're interested. If you have questions about it too, what's required, I think it's only a few meetings. It is just having to review the applications that come in within the region. And
yeah, I know it's 38 applications. I think it's mostly reviewing those and at least one virtual meeting next year.
Did you say that, Ryan, did you say, or Chris, did you say there was another hand? I don't see it on my monitor.
Commissioner Savas does have his hand raised.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just want to alert staff that I believe the hamlet of Beaver Creek is Bill Merchant, our member. So,
Carrie, if you could, you can either make me a host or you can move Hamlets of Beaver Creek over. Thank you, Commissioner.
Well, okay, since we have a quorum, let's skip back and again, we'll dispense with the welcomes. We have everybody here got started really late. You can review the agenda on your own. We have public comment, and who is going to be handling that tonight? Is that you, Chris, or is somebody else?
I can let you know if any attendees have raised their hand. And then there's also a process. I don't see anyone on their phone. I guess there's actually one person. Yes, hit *9 if you were on your phone to raise your hand.
This is public comment.
Correct. I'm not currently seeing any hands raised.
Okay, then we'll skip it. We can always come back if somebody didn't quite get in quick enough.
Right.
A little bit of commission administration. We have the August 2nd meeting. That was the last time we met as this group, but we also met on the 13th for the toll work group. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to review those minutes and we can get them approved. If you have and you feel so inclined, please make a motion. Somebody can raise a hand, and if I don't, Paul, thank you very much. And who's the second? Oh, Mike Oakes, thank you for doing that. They're looking and saying, did I really do that? So there's a motion and a second. Any discussion on those minutes? All right, all in favor, just raise your hand. You don't need to say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Any opposed? Maybe we ought to go there. All right, it looks like it passes. We have another action item tonight. Each of the jurisdictions appoints members, as you know, to this group. We have one from Multnomah County. That's Jessica Vega Peterson. I saw Jessica here. Well, there she is. I see her on screen. So we need to reappoint her. And then I also need to remind you that there are other jurisdictions that have not sent us in the appointments that have expired. And it would be nice to get all those. So we do have voting members. So I would ask somebody to nominate the reappointment of Jessica Vega Peterson, Multnomah County Commissioner, to the Region 1 Act.
so moved.
Second.
Okay, did we catch who the motion was from in the second? I see Bill and I see Paul. Okay. All those in favor, raise their right hand. Any in opposition other than I guess Jessica, she can vote no, but the rest of you. All right, I don't see any. Thank you. So we thank you all for that. And Jessica, thank you for getting that nomination in. We have an interstate bridge update. Greg Johnson's with us tonight to do that. I saw him on film here a minute ago, and I think he's still here. So would you take over?
I'm just going to introduce him real quick. This is Greg Jones. He's running the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project for us. Greg just asked for a few minutes to give you a short update. It's not a full update, but they're going to be out in the community, and I wanted him to have an opportunity to tell us what they're up to and when we can expect more. So with that, I'll pass it over to Greg.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Greg Johnson. Once again, I'm the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program Administrator. I've been out here for a little over 15 months, trying to move this project over the finish line this time. As most everyone knows, that the project officially ended in 2014 when the Washington legislature did not approve funding for the approved project. So we are going through an environmental and planning process to revive this project. We are doing a lot of outreach. One of the things that we are doing is making sure that everyone knows what has changed in the last 10 years since this project was the Columbia River crossing. So we have gathered all of those changes. The 6 problems that existed back then still exist. So congestion, freight movements through the corridor, safety issues, the lack of a high capacity transit mode across the river, as well as a lack of a modern active transportation facility. And last, but certainly not least, is the earthquake vulnerability that exists at this bridge. As folks know, the one bridge that carries southbound is 104 years old. The bridge that carries northbound is 62 years old. So we are working to revive the project. We're using a lot of information that was gathered, but we are not locked into what the CRC solution was. 2 of the things that we've heard from our partners that are critical to be taken into consideration this go round are equity as well as climate. So we are working with our partner agencies. We have a principal climate officer as well as a principal equity officer who are guiding us and putting together a framework or blueprint of how we will address these issues as the project is being planned, designed, and delivered, as well as operated. So we have been meeting for over a year with the public and listening to issues of concern. So we are now in the process of putting forward what we call the IBR solution. And what that is the 4 pillars of what we are planning to build. So those 4 pillars are in the form of 4 questions. The first is how many lanes will be carried across the bridge? And we know that that is a concern for folks. They don't want to see induced traffic. They want to make sure that we are building a streamlined as possible cross section to go across that bridge. The second question is what type of high capacity transit will cross the river? Once again, we are seeking to make this a multimodal corridor where we can entice and encourage people to get out of those single occupancy vehicle trips and ride transit, whether it be bus rapid transit or light rail from downtown Vancouver across the river to the Expo Center and eventually to downtown Portland. So the third issue is whether there will be a direct interchange on Hayden Island. Since the last go round, the Port of Portland has changed its plan to develop West Hayden Island. And so that gives us an opportunity to look at how Hayden Island is accessed. Should it be directly off of I-5 or should it come off of Marine Drive to the south? So we are convening working groups that are looking at that issue and giving us feedback and getting an understanding of what that will mean for the folks who live on Hayden Island, the businesses on Hayden Island, and folks who access Hayden Island. So the fourth question is more of a esoteric technical issue, but it does have ramifications for the overall program. And that's whether we will replace the North Portland Harbor Bridge that carries I-5 from the south end of Hayden Island to mainland Portland. So before it was looked at as just seismically retrofitting this structure, but that decision was made 15 years ago. So now we are weighing cost and benefits to see whether we should replace it. And it's not an inexpensive question. It's approximately a difference of $200 million. So we are looking at that in depth. and the impacts that it would have on the floating homes on the south side of Hayden Island. So those 4 key questions, we are digging into the data, and we are looking to take to our committees and eventually to our bi-state legislative committee our IBR solution to these 4 questions. And this will be the boundaries of what we're going to build. There are still many questions that will have to be answered about how. And so in that how will be whether there will be community benefits agreements, whether there will be tolling going across the bridge, and a number of other sub-issues that are related to how this bridge will be built and how it will be operated. So we are looking at January or early February to bring the IBR solution out to the public and receive public comments and have our partner agencies, which consists of both ports, the City of Vancouver, the City of Portland, both DOTs, Oregon DOT and Washington DOT, both transit agencies, and both metropolitan planning organizations, both Metro and RTC. So those partners will receive our recommendation for the IBR solution and give us feedback. We will take their feedback, add it in, and eventually towards the end of March, early April, take it to the bi-state legislative team that will eventually have to okay the funding for whatever is decided upon. So if we get their approval to move forward, we will then take this to our federal partners to take the next step in the NEPA process. So the National Environmental Planning Act process. So we are moving with some speed. This project has been around for almost a quarter of a century. So folks have lived and died and not seen anything happen. So we are working with speed so we can sync up with the national discussion on infrastructure funding and make sure that this bridge, which we feel makes a great case for being of national importance, to move this forward. So that's where we are in a nutshell. I hope to come back to you later before the year is out and talk to you about some of the trends that we've seen, some of the preliminary decisions that are necessary. But I will take any questions that you guys may have for me. So I see Bill Avison.
Yes, thank you. Good presentation. Presuming you get through all of the legislative steps and you get everyone on the same page, I guess, in March, and then you get through the NEPA process, when is the final build out? Are we another 10, 20 years out, or what's a good guess?
What we're looking at, if we get through the environmental process by sometime in late 2023 is what our schedule shows. We will be designing in 2024 and hopefully breaking ground in 2025. And right now we show it as a 6 to 7 year construction period where the old bridge would be maintained as we are building the new one. And then the old bridge would be taken out upon the traffic switch. So if the funding from both states, and we are asking both states to look at between 1 and 1.2 billion each to help fund this overall program, which ranges in cost depending on which mode of transit is selected, between $3.5 to $4.5 billion. So we'll be looking at federal dollars as well as potential tolling to fill the gaps.
Thank you.
Bill, for your question. Anyone else?
Paul
I
here.
guess just before we let Greg go, if there's a board or a commission or a group that's interested in hearing more, Greg, can they reach out to you through
Yes.
Chris? Okay. I just wanted to put that offer out there. I know you're out reaching, hitting up most of the groups already. I know you guys are out talking to a lot of folks, but if you haven't heard from them and you're interested, please reach out to Greg. Thank you for being here, Greg. Oh, Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I had a question for Greg, and that is, the traffic backing up for miles on the Oregon side, trying to get over the bridge, and knowing that, as I understand it, engineers have told me that there's some design issues on the Washington side, both on the interstate bridge and also on the Glenn Jackson Bridge. The Glenn Jackson Bridge has plenty of lanes. The challenge seems to be the design aspects of both 205 and I-5 with regards to 14 and other deal. Is there a solution that's been engineered to resolve the I-5 backup, which seems to be on the Washington side in Vancouver?
So one of the things that we are looking at, we know that there are 3 through lanes to the north in Washington, 3 through lanes south of us heading to downtown Portland. One of the key issues that causes a certain amount of the backup in the area there are 7 interchanges in a 5-mile stretch. So all of those vehicles getting on and off and merging and weaving into the through traffic lanes daily cause incidents, cause slowdowns, crashes. So we are looking at the use of auxiliary lanes to take those movements and separate them from through traffic until folks get up to speed and they can merge in a safe way. So that's one of the design aspects that's being examined, is auxiliary lanes. It's controversial because, once again, people want a smaller footprint as possible, but these type of lanes are generally looked at as operational rather than capacity. What they do is give the through traffic a better opportunity to flow smoother and safer, producing less greenhouse gases and less crashes, and therefore less backups. So we have some very complex designs to connect to SR 14 to make sure that folks can access downtown Vancouver. So that interchange is going to be tremendously complex, as well as the interchange at Marine Drive. So there's a lot of technical challenges to be faced, but we've got a great team that's working with us, that's making all of these design possibilities, and are going to be ready to start rolling those out as soon as we get those 4 corners of the program decided.
Thank you, Greg. We're going to get back on schedule a bit. That's great work, and it's an interesting project, to say the least. With that, well, thank you for being here tonight, and we'll go to the Federal Infrastructure Investment Package. And Trevor, can I introduce you, or Ryan, do you want to do that? You don't want to do?
Go ahead.
I can take it.
All right.
I'm happy to take it. I do have a PowerPoint. I don't know, Carrie, if you need to stop sharing in order for me to start sharing, but I'm gonna give that a shot right now. While I say that, oh yeah, it says I cannot. So I will hold while we sort that out. So my name is Trevor Sleeman. I'm the Federal Affairs Advisor at ODOT. So my job is to keep track of all things transportation, federal transportation funding and policy related, and work with our delegation to make sure that Oregon sees a benefit when big infrastructure packages, for example, are pending in Congress. So let me just rearrange here so I can see what I'm doing. So I guess it's, it was a busy weekend, and I'm glad I didn't send my PowerPoint in advance, because it would have been out of date even if I had sent it in at 5 o'clock on Friday night. So I'll get later in the presentation, I'll get to kind of the next steps and what exactly is going on to the extent that we know it. So just first some basics. over the last couple of years in DC, there's been this sort of recurring joke about, this week it's finally infrastructure week. And that's just intensified this year. Pretty much all year, there's been a pretty heavy focus on infrastructure in DC. And really since, that sort of mid to late March unveiling of the president's American Jobs Plan, the multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure plan, there's really been this heavy focus on an infrastructure investment package or stimulus package or whatever you want to call it. At the same time, our very most basic federal authorization of highway and transit funding and policy, the FAST Act, which was a 5-year bill that passed at the end of 2015, that expired technically a year ago, and that was something that Congress this year needed to reauthorize just as a regular piece of congressional housekeeping. These bills are often authorized 5-6 years at a time, and we had come to the end of the previous one. So we have kind of a few different things coming together. And so people say infrastructure this year, and you can be forgiven if you're a little bit confused about what that means and what the status of it is. So this thing has been variously called the American Jobs Plan, the bipartisan infrastructure framework was the name given to it when that bipartisan group of senators in the White House negotiated and announced the deal at the end of the kind of July-August timeline. It's also been called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. The actual text of the legislation calls it the IIJA, or Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So you'll hear this referred to in lots of different contexts with lots of different acronyms. I'm going to call it the BIF tonight, just because that was sort of one of the original ones, and I think it's mildly amusing. But you may hear this come up elsewhere with various different acronyms. And what it means is it kind of combines a couple of those things I talked about earlier. So we've got our basic 5-year reauthorization of the FAST Act. This is the piece of legislation that will authorize everything we do, all of our highway and transit programs. It's kind of the building block of the STIP that you all contribute to constructing. So that is in there. There's a full 5-year reauthorization of the FAST Act with some additional funding for reauthorization and a couple of new programs. There's also some special one-time, more infrastructure package style funding, and they spread that all out over a 5-year term. So what's that mean for Oregon? Well, on the highway side of the ledger, meaning this isn't just for highways, this is highways, bike ped, rec trails, FLAP, all kinds of programs fall under this umbrella. We'll have about an additional $1 billion over the 5 years of the bill. So that's good for a 38% increase, which is pretty good. All things considered. I think, particularly on the transit side, you'll hear advocates be pretty disappointed with the fact that the $200 million coming to the state over the next 5 years is only a 35% increase. I think, it's a little bit of a case of expectations, right? We had the president announce huge numbers. Earlier in the year, we had Chairman DeFazio's reauthorization bill, which had historic transit investment levels in it, and transit in some ways was unfortunately kind of an afterthought in this deal as it was negotiated on the Senate side. The Senate committees responsible for highways and rail programs did some good work and put together bills, but the banking committee, which is responsible for transit, kind of at the last minute contributed this piece. And so I think if you hear out there any sort of disappointment or consternation from folks in the transit community, is probably why. The funding was a little bit less, I think, than they had expected or hoped. But still, 35% increase isn't too bad. This is just to help you visualize. I talked a little bit about kind of the reauthorization portion of the bill. That's that sort of darker, well, it shows up as teal on my screen anyway. So those are our basic core programs that we've come to love and know. The Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, or the Highway Safety Improvement Program. So you can see there's a good jump there in year one. There's a couple of new programs that are created, and I'll talk about those in a little bit, and some additional funding. And then on top, you get that kind of infrastructure package type funding. Is on the top of those stacked bars that represent some special appropriations that will, if this bill passes, I guess that's the other point I should make this clearly, has not passed yet. And if it does, we'll be the beneficiaries as you can see, some increased funding. Here are the transit numbers again. Good jump there in year one and steady growth thereafter. There may be, and I'll get to this a little bit later, there may be a chance to add some additional transit funding specifically in the too many R's, in the budget reconciliation process. So, so stay tuned for more there. So in terms of the special one-time funding, Oregon will be the recipient of about 50, I think, I can't remember, it's $54 million a year, each year over the 5 years of the bill to invest in repairing bridges. And with the majority of the bridges in ODOT's inventory over 50 years in age, this funding will certainly help us deal with an emergent problem. I think about 15% of this funding is set aside for off-system bridges, so certainly a portion of this will be headed to the local system, but taken together, over $250 million over the next 5 years, specifically dedicated by the Congress for bridges. So that's a positive. There's a new formula program in the bill for directing funding toward resilience. So all the numbers I'm talking about tonight will be over the 5 years of the bill. So $94-ish million for this new program that is directed toward the resilience of the system. So we've got, again, another specific category from Congress that they're directing the funding to. Pretty broad eligibility within that category, but a category nonetheless. So we've got $94 million that will be directed toward resilience. So that can be climate change related, that can be, adapting to sea level rise, that can be seismic resilience, pretty broad eligibility within that resilience category, and a good chunk of funding to do it with over the coming 5 years. So that certainly will be a welcome new program and funding increase. Safety, so what we do with the All Roads Transportation Safety Program, if you're familiar with that, is the program that Congress has authorized is called the Highway Safety Improvement Program, and we basically put the HSIP money into ARTS. So I think our annual rate in 2021 for HSIP was about $31 million. So over the course of the 5-year bill, an additional $40 million for safety. What's that, about another $8 million a year in the ARTS program. So to the extent that you all are involved with and make use of that program at your various jurisdictions, look out for some decent funding increases coming down the pike there. I mentioned a little bit the potential for some local funding in the new bridge program. There are also significant funding increases coming to things, different programs that share resources with local governments, whether that's the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, Transportation Alternatives, CMAQ, you name it. Most of these existing programs are getting a nice little funding increase over the course of the bill. Active, I just mentioned TAP. So there's an additional $30 million in direct funding for bike ped programs. A portion of that is sub-allocated to the large metro areas. And the balance, I think, we typically put that through largely to the Community Paths program, but a good increase in investment there for active transportation. A couple of new programs in the bill for addressing climate change. The $52 million there for expanding the availability of EV charging stations is we don't currently have that program. And so if this passes in year one of the bill, we'll have, $10-11 million that we're going to have to put into the system. Thankfully, our climate office has been doing some good needs assessments and work there. But that's a good chunk of funding over the course of the 5-year bill to really to invest in growing that system of EV charging infrastructure. There's a new carbon reduction program as well. Like TAP and like other programs, a portion of this is sub-allocated to the large MPOs. But within the category of carbon reduction, there's pretty broad eligibility, whether it's transit or carpooling or whatever you can kind of think of that's related to carbon reduction. We'll have the ability to make investments in the system to reduce carbon emissions and help achieve our climate commitments. So some good programming there for sure. I mentioned earlier a couple $100 million in additional funding for transit. That's obviously, more heavily directed to the large urban areas, but that will definitely increase funding and federal funding that we're passing through to transit districts around the state, whether urban or rural. Good funding for grant programs for transit vehicles, whether that's bus and bus facility or low and no emission grants. A huge amount of grant funding for improving passenger rail service on our Cascades corridor. So I think we're hoping that, if law between ODOT and WashDOT, we can hopefully win some cash there to invest in improving on-time performance and ridership on our train service. So the other portion of the kind of the infrastructure package funding in this bill is discretionary grants. So Secretary Buttigieg and his staff are going to have over $100 billion in discretionary grant opportunities to hand out to states and local governments and tribes for a huge range of activities. So, a lot of the old familiar grants, infra, Tiger, and those kinds of things that we're used to, but there's some new ones there too. There's a little one for culverts. There's a great big one for bridges that I think is a pretty ideal fit if we were to go out and compete for a grant for the interstate bridge, for example. There's a Reconnecting Communities program that I think could be a good fit for what we're trying to do with Rose Quarter, for example. Certainly grants that benefit transit, rail, airports, ports, and all modes. So my message internally and to all of you who are responsible for managing transportation systems, whatever mode they may be, is start sharpening your pencils if you've got good grant projects lined up, and maybe start hiring grant writers or whatever it is you need to do to be prepared, because DOT is going to start making lots of NOFOs available next year with lots of cash for folks. And our goal is always to maximize the number of federal dollars, transportation dollars coming back to Oregon. And if we're going to do that over the next 5 years, we're going to have to work for it with the amount of money they're putting into discretionary grants. So sign up for those DOT email alerts and make sure you don't miss a NOFO, because there's going to be a lot of them flying around here if this bill passes. So the timeline for this is a little strange. When the agreement was announced in August, we were kind of thinking they would pass a bill either in August or in September with this deadline. So now that they've extended it for another month, I'm not quite sure what happens to the timeline here, but whatever happens, if the bill passes, obviously there's quite a bit of additional flexible funding available for, programming into the STIP, and the OTC will want input from you all before they do that. So I think, when we were thinking the bill was going to pass August, September, we were thinking maybe, the OTC would seek input from the acts this fall, and they could make a decision on programming the additional funding, maybe by the January meeting. So I think as that slips, we're kind of pushing farther out into the year next year. But whatever the timing, we're going to have to be ready, because there's that big funding increase in year one that we're going to have to be ready to program. So keep an eye on whether the bill passes, and certainly the OTC will be back with you all to get input from you. I guess the only thing I would share is that there are additional flexible dollars in this bill, but as I've kind of walked through the last 10 minutes or so, a lot of the funding has been will be provided by Congress for very specific purposes. So there won't be a whole lot of discretion over how, for example, the bridge money's got to go to bridges, right? We're not going to be able to move that around to different kinds of pots. So that'll be something that we all will have to wrestle with. So in terms of next steps, if you followed this last week, it was absolutely crazy. If you don't follow this stuff closely, consider yourself lucky. It was just an absolute mess. And so where we ended is no infrastructure bill and no reconciliation bill, and the Highway Trust Fund technically lapsed, and the authorization and funding for it expired for a day or a day or two, and Congress just passed an extension through Halloween to buy themselves a little bit more time to negotiate, because they're still stuck in this dance of moderates want to pass the infrastructure bill first before dealing with reconciliation, and progressives, I think, want to make sure that either the reconciliation bill has a vote or a clear path to a vote before they agree to support the infrastructure bill. That's basically where we've been since August, and that hasn't really changed much despite all the deadlines blown and, pressure being exerted. So, we'll have another month of that while they negotiate this out until Halloween. One bit on the reconciliation bill, it'll be interesting to see what, I think they're talking about the size of that coming down from 3.5 trillion to, 1.9 to 2.2 or something like that. So if they bring that number down, it'll be interesting to see what happens to the transportation dollars in that bill, because for now, there's an additional $60 billion in the House version of that bill, with a good chunk of it directed toward transit, which I think would help bring up some of those numbers in that bar chart I showed earlier. And there's a good chunk of it dedicated toward reconnecting communities and high-speed rail and all these other priorities. It'd be interesting to see which of those survive if significant cuts are made to the reconciliation package. So I would say, as we approach Halloween, don't be surprised if we get another short-term extension and while they try to buy some more time to negotiate a deal. I am still hopeful, though, that we'll get some sort of resolution on this by the end of the year. I think there's been too much progress and too much momentum in terms of negotiating a deal, having White House support, getting it through the Senate. I think they've made it far enough through the process that I think there is a deal to be had. So I'm optimistic, but I think it's probably not going to be clean, and it may take us a little while to get there. So that's what I've got. Let me stop sharing here and see if we have any questions.
First of all, before we take questions, Trevor, just thank you. That's excellent recommendations on the grant writing as well as getting prepared. So the first one I saw was Peter Truax.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I also appreciate the presentation. From Forest Grove, we are very interested in another DOT program, RAISE, Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity. We have our request in for a grant, $5.3 million local match for a $26 million project on the Council Creek Trail. So we're working along with Cornelius and Hillsborough and Washington County and ODOT in this regard on the recently or the hopefully to be vacated rail line north of those three cities that would allow us for a trail, pedestrian and bike trail from Forest Grove to Cornelius to get people off of TV Highway as far as pedestrians are concerned. So yeah, I don't know if that's part of the whole package, but this RAISE funding is something that we are very interested in out in Forest Grove and the west end of Washington County. And I think that's part of the overall project, Trevor. So thanks again.
Yeah, so if you've already applied for it, you're applying for funding that was already made available by Congress. So it's not directly part of this bill, but what I will say is, a lot of applicants to that program are successful after having applied multiple times, right? You apply, you don't get it, but you get feedback from DOT, which they're very good about giving. You make your application a little bit better. Sometimes you have to submit 2-3 times and then you win. So the good news for you is if you don't win this year, this bill does permanently authorize the RAISE grant program for 5 years and increase funding for it. And the problem with that program over the years, it's been known variously as Tiger and Build, and now it's RAISE. It's never been permanently authorized in statute. It's always been a kind of a creation of the appropriations committees every year, and it's been sort of their whim whether or not they fund it. Well, this bill would permanently reauthorize it. So if you don't win, there will be another 5 bites at the apple guaranteed. So, I guess that's maybe the silver lining if you don't win, but good luck and I hope you do.
Well, that's what we're hoping. We realize that the chances of getting it the first time out are not the greatest, but at least we will be in the room on that. Thanks again.
The only other one I see is Mary Nolan, but before I call on Mary, is there anybody else? We're trying to keep back on track. I don't see anything. So Mary, you're up.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Trevor. A lot of moving parts in this and a lot of egos involved, I'm sure, back in Washington. I just want to call to our collective attention that this could represent such a significant increase in investment in infrastructure, including transportation, that it really calls on us to think about how we move collectively our regional transportation system into the next generation. And I appreciate, Trevor, that you outlined that the OTC will be seeking input, but I really hope that here in the act that we can be deliberate about how we give that input and thoughtful with enough time to give input that is well-reasoned and compelling. So, Mr. Chair, this is to you as well as to Ryan, a request for really making sure that the agenda allows us to have a thorough conversation about this.
Point well taken. All right, Trevor. Well, thank you so much for coming tonight. It's very insightful. And I'm sorry about the rush. We got started late because we had technical difficulties. And so we're catching up a little bit. But
No
thanks again for your presentation. I appreciate it. With that, we'll move to Chris Ford, and you have some discussion on some bylaws amendment.
Yeah, and I'll move through this pretty quickly. I hope that these are pretty straightforward. There's no action today, but it's looking forward to an action or next meeting in December. Really quickly, I know I don't have a lot of time. I want to give a big thank you to Vanessa Vassar, who's our Strategic Initiatives Advisor and Principal Planner at Region 1, who found the password for the Zoom, and Carrie Franey, our Associate Planner and Major Projects, who's at her first act tonight and has been an incredible help. So they both stepped in and fixed the problems of earlier. Thank you. So as you know, I've been at ODOT for about 9 months, and in managing the act, I've been going through the process of doing a lot of membership renewals. They're staggered every 2 years, where about half the act goes through some kind of membership reauthorization. And so I have encountered a number of challenges. And so in response to just like questions and issues that have come up multiple times from various agency members, ODOT staff have proposed some things to provide some clarity and flexibility around membership. So the hope is that these are straightforward to explain. There's a memo in your in the ACT materials, and I'll run through these quickly and see if there's any questions or comments on them. And so I've kind of put these into 3 different proposals. One relates to the nominations of members. That are simply a clarification about how to document nominations and to explain what the governing body action is, simply to ensure this is that if there's a commission or a committee, that it's, the result is the action of that committee was simply like a signed letter. I've gotten many questions about how do we transmit this information. This is not a change to existing policy. Carrie, next slide. Term of service, again, not a change to existing policy, but it's a little hard to get it. Act terms don't reset. Whenever someone's appointed to a vacant term, you inherit its expiration date. This is the way the act was set up originally, so that half the memberships expire in, say, 2021, half in 2023, always at the end of June. Again, I've had a number of questions about that. And then next slide. And then there's a few more on this. So right now, there's no change in the existing policy proposed to the City of Portland. There's currently no requirement that there's an elected official. It simply clarifies that. I've had a few members ask about this. Metro, there is an old term in there that says that the JPAC chair needs to be a voting member. And this changes it to any elected member of the Metro Council. The chair of JPAC has not been on the R1 Act for a number of years now. And so this has not been an enforced feature. And so this is about providing more flexibility and representation. And then finally, they were going through this, there was actually simply an error in the bylaws. At one place, it should have said 3 and it said 2. So that is the nature of what is in the proposed edits, amendments to the bylaws. And I want to see if there are any comments or questions about these. Oh, got 2 hands.
Go ahead.
Chair, you have, I don't know what order they came in. I have both.
I see Mary. Then I see Paul. Yeah.
Yes.
Why don't we go with Mary? Ladies first.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to step a little delicately here. because this is a comment about governance and not about individuals. But we have terms for members of this advisory committee. We don't have, as I have read through the bylaws, any provision for a rotation of the leadership of the committee. And Commissioner Rogers, Commissioner Savas, fabulous input, fabulous leadership for the discussions here. But standard good governance often provides for a rotation of chair and vice chair positions. And I just want to ask Chris if that has been considered or if it's something that we should be considering soon.
So the bylaws do contain a term that the chairs are elected every 2 years, and it should be on the first meeting of the calendar year. I'm a little new and I haven't looked through all of the, I haven't spent my time looking through the old minutes about when the last time there was an election on that. There's a term on there about designating and electing the chair and the vice chair.
Okay, but I'm talking about an intentional rotation.
That's the I'm aware of.
And to Chris, I don't recall that happening at the beginning
This year, which
Okay.
would imply that would. So.
I would just put that out to my colleague that some mechanism for probably relieve the also give us the objectives in different styles.
Okay. Thank you for your input. Paul, something too?
Yeah, a lot of our members are aware of how it was formed and why it was the last act in the state assembled. And I think, action and from the legislature and you ODOT for working with Oregon consensus to get us to this place we are today with the act. But my recollection as being one of the people on the front end of this, that I think it was incumbent upon us to report back to the OTC as to number one, how we're doing with our organization and the act, and had we resolved some of the issues that we had discovered and learned from during the formation about representation, about coordination, about the roles, and so forth. And I really believe that the region is really frankly in dire need. This is my own personal opinion, is in dire need of a table where a number of our jurisdictions can actually discuss transportation issues and challenges and all the things that go along with it at a greater level with greater involvement. And that could be, I think the act comes closest to that. But I guess the question is, are we all happy with that? And I don't know the answer, because that answer might be different for everyone here around the room. But with regard to the bylaw changes, I'll just I'll direct my comments back to the bylaws. I kind of suggest that, ideally some of the people that were there on the front end of this review some of the bylaws, or the bylaws and changes that are suggested. I do know that Metro really wanted to seek more coordination, and it seems logical that there ought to be a requirement that the Metro Council seat here, for example, be a member of JPAC. I mean, ideally it was the chair for that coordination, but I don't think it has to be the chair, but there should be some requirement that the JPAC member is bringing back, or the Metro member is bringing back that representation from JPAC and having that. I mean, for example, what if the Metro representative seat had no connection with JPAC? That may not be the kind of coordination I thought we heard that Metro had really advocated for very strongly. So I just think maybe whether it's a subcommittee, approved by this group, just to revisit some of these changes and also touch base with the OTC and how we're doing. We're overdue for that review.
Thank you, Paul. You and I both sat on that original. This is for most people, they don't realize it's a fairly new act. I mean, it's just formed, and it took a bit of effort. Jason, I see your hand up.
I wondered if Councillor Nolan wanted to comment a little bit more. It'd be helpful for me to know if she's got some specific thoughts or proposal for us to mull over about the way that, I mean, I heard the feedback, but I guess I'm wondering if you, Councillor Nolan, have a specific proposal to consider related to chair and vice chair.
That's a reasonable question, isn't it, Jason? And I don't have a specific proposal. Given that we've got different counties represented here, that could be a starting point for how something is structured. Currently, we have 2 county commissioners. That means we don't have anyone representing any of the cities, large or small. I think there are a couple of different ways of achieving it. And I think Commissioner Savis's suggestion of getting a small group together to talk through options on bylaws changes to include this discussion would be fair. I am interested, Paul, Commissioner Savis, in the idea that we should tell Metro who to appoint, but not tell any of the other elected governments who they should appoint. So I think it's worth having a conversation about.
Thank you. It is reasonable. Mary, it wasn't Paul who said that. That's the requirement in the bylaw. It's a JPAC chair. And we've sort of ignored that. In fact, the JPAC chair, who is a Metro Council member, also wanted to have a standing requirement that this chair of this committee be the Metro, either chair of JPAC. And so I think there were many cities and many counties who, though we like Metro a lot, didn't feel that that was probably too independent. And so that's sort of how I arrived. There's a lot of back politics on this. We are where we're at.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Isn't there always?
There always is. Yeah. Ryan, did you want to say something?
I did. I just wanted to say, I welcome this conversation. I'm actually kind of glad to hear people are interested in this, and it has evolved. As I think Commissioner Savis and Commissioner Rogers mentioned, the formation of this was not an easy task. There was a balance of a whole lot of politics at the time. And I think now we do have, some experience under our belt, and it's a good time to be thinking about what maybe we would like to see different. I think the changes Chris was bringing here were really more just trying to clean things up, but having a committee to sit down and talk about what are some other areas where we maybe would like to see some changes, what are maybe some ideas some members would like to suggest. I like the idea of a subcommittee because I do think it would require quite a bit of conversation and thought that we don't necessarily always have the time for as a full body at every meeting, but we could certainly bring those back for a robust discussion here at the full act if there is interest in that. So why don't we ask folks who are interested in serving on that to also send an email into Chris and just express some interest. We'll see what that generates and then come back before we come, and maybe we'll do set up a committee to have that conversation as a body. And I want to make sure that everybody who's interested in that does have an opportunity to participate.
Good idea, and we'll do that. Thank you, Ryan. Chris, do you have more on the proposed bylaw adjustments?
Nope, that's pretty good. Sounds like if you are interested in talking more about it, you should write me. For those who haven't, you probably have my email address, but chris.ford@state.or.us.
Thank you. We will then move to the regional transit updates. Jason Kelly is with us, and he's kind of the home run hitter today. We are moving through this quickly, and I appreciate everybody's patience with the technical difficulties we had. We started late. So Jason, jump right on in.
Very good. Thank you, Chair. I'll try to do my part to expedite as well and move through this. I'm going to be talking about providing an update on the I-5 pilot project for bus on shoulder, something Mr. Winsheimer has communicated various times over the last several months, but we're getting close to implementation and launch. So I'm going to go into the weeds a little bit and give that general construct and overview of the program. Next slide, Carrie. 2 clicks, please. So in case bus on shoulder is new to you, just a little bit of grounding, quite simple here. It's when the transit vehicle is routed onto a shoulder, pretty self-explanatory. In this case, bus on shoulder exists on the interstate for the Portland metro area, and I'll show you some slides where the location is exactly at. Bus on shoulder is essentially an innovative transit solution, and it's an alternative methodology that is low cost. So we're squeezing the system, if you will, to provide some solutions during these congested areas. And speaking of, next slide, Carrie, this is really the rationale and the causality of bus on shoulder. We have major congestion issues, no surprises there. And because of those congestion occurrences, we're experiencing some issues with transit performance and reliability. And that also creates a situation where transit is a less attractive modality, and therefore that exacerbates transportation as more vehicles go onto the road. So ultimately, this is a solution to help kind of flip the switch here by bringing more people to transit. And also, it's a way to get out of this issue because we have restrictions where the resources in the space just are inhibiting our ability to build our way out of this, hence bus on shoulder. Next slide, Carrie, 2, please. So here are 2 pilots. The one up to the right, it was put into play last September of 2020. For tonight's purpose, I'm going to talk about the second pilot on Interstate 5 in partnership with SMART, that's South Metro Area Regional Transit, based out of Wilsonville. In terms of some basic details, we have been planning on this for over a year, and I can say that we have encountered 0 hiccups. We're planning to launch and implement on the 1st of November. And this, as I mentioned, is a partnership with South Metro Area Transit. And a point of interest here is SMART is the authorized pilot provider during this particular pilot service. We're going to be operating for a minimum of a year, and then we're going to potentially extend up to 2 years pending the success of this particular program. In terms of the location, I'm just going to go into, I'll show a couple slides here about where the exact location is, but I'm going to ask Carrie to move forward into our preliminary goals. Here's a set of 5 goals that we've enumerated. First and foremost, we want to ensure the public safety. As I mentioned earlier, through bus on shoulder, our goal is to create a more reliable and attractive option for our commuting public. By default, we're going to be addressing some of our congestion issues. And as I noted here, we're going to squeeze the system and maximize its use without adding a lot of resources to make that happen. And last but not least, the purpose of pilot programs is to really test the program, see how it performs, adjust the performance in the implementation, and adapt it accordingly, and perhaps modify or translate to other corridors as we learn about these pilots. So here's our pilot location. It is on a 2-mile segment between Wilsonville and the I-5 205 interchange. Bus on shoulder in this case, industry practice could operate on both the inside and outside shoulder, but this pilot will be operational on the right side only. And as I mentioned, while there's other operators in the corridor, ODOT selected to test the pilot with SMART before expanding to include other agencies. 2 clicks, Carrie. So here is the actual path of travel that I have to make comment here is not to scale, but it illustrates how the Bus on Shoulder program really operates here. To the north, you'll see Lower Boonesbury Road. To the south is Ellington Road. In drawing your attention to the circled areas in the center there and down to the lower left, these are the actual authorized Bus on Shoulder segments. In totality, they come up with about 2 miles of linear travel for those routes or those segments. And you'll note here going northbound and southbound that the buses will not cross on and off ramps, but will rather merge into the general purpose lanes and then enter the Bus on Shoulder segments. These segments were identified because of the capacity in those particular locations, capacity including the infrastructure space, so the shoulders were wide enough. The infrastructure like grates, drainage covers were able to withstand those, the buses, whatnot. And these are highly congested locations. So with that, we'll go to our next slide. So here's what our buses, our smart buses are going to look like. These are recently wrapped and illustrate, I think there's a total of 4 buses, and the Route 2X will be operating on the shoulder during this 1 to 3 year pilot. So a little detail about how Bus on Shoulder operates, some simple facts here. First and foremost, it is activated when speed drops below a certain threshold. So that threshold happens to be 35 miles per hour. Additionally, transit vehicles are allowed to travel no more than 15 miles an hour faster than the adjacent traffic. But there is that maximum of 35 miles per hour. So we built in some safety measures to ensure safety for the motorists and the transit operators. Thirdly, merging into traffic is required to happen 1,000 feet before shoulder obstructions, on and off ramps, etc. And lastly, an important detail here is transit is required to to yield to emergency vehicles, law enforcement vehicles, maintenance vehicles, disabled vehicles, and pedestrians and bicycles if they are on the shoulder. So what are we doing to get the word out? Well, this month is showtime. We are hitting the streets, we being SMART and ODOT, to distribute the word. And we're following our communications and public education plan by conducting a number of different outreach activities. These are some of the ones that we've identified and are currently undertaking, including the briefings such as this one. And we're going to be doing a pretty substantial social media blitz starting now. In addition, you'll be seeing some videos online as well as on social media. And of course, we have our standard operating distribution methods. One point here too is we've built in some equity principles into outreach to disadvantaged communities. And so we're collaborating with SMART to conduct those activities and that outreach now through November. In terms of what we're going to do after we implement, we're going to be monitoring and evaluating the program. We have 22 22 performance measures that we have that we'll be considering on a quarterly review period, and then we'll be conducting a before and after evaluation on these 3 primary topics: safety, how the infrastructure is impacted by the operations of Bus on Shoulder, and then of course the transit performance, which SMART has indicated that their goals is to increase their on-time performance by 10% in this particular case, and the Route 2X is their most underperforming route in their system. So that was my 2-minute drill, or my attempt at least. Happy to answer any questions.
All right, Jason, why don't you quickly go around the mountain, and then And then we'll do it at the end. Is that all right?
Certainly. Okay, switching gears, we're moving over to a report back to the ACT on a different project. This is not Bus on Shoulder. This is Vision Around the Mountain. The Vision Around the Mountain project was recently completed this past summer in August. ODOT was funded by a grant from FHWA to serve as a convener of partners, including our co-sponsors, transit agencies, to develop a multi-jurisdictional regional transit vision. The primary corridors considered in Vision Around the Mountain includes Oregon 35, Highway 26, and of course we considered Interstate 84 as a connecting corridor, providing access to Mount Hood. In terms of the process of development, we conducted a series of workshops, a survey with our stakeholders, some interviews, and we also integrated actions and projects from previously adopted and funded plans. In terms of its purpose, the interest here is Vision Around the Mountain is going to serve as essentially a resource document for our partners to utilize for grant applications, to inform activities, allocation of funds. There's a whole host of options here, but essentially this will provide a guidance tool for a number of different transit agencies. And by count, there's 5 in the rural areas that collaborate in a manner to provide service to or around Mount Hood. Next slide, Carrie. So purpose and need of this project is to essentially improve those connections and coordination of transit from what is a very, very broad travel shed from the metropolitan area and as far away as Central Oregon. And with multiple operators, there was no coordinated strategy. So FHWA gave it these funds and recommended that we bring these stakeholders together in order to align and synchronize transit actions, whether that be transit system enhancements, customer engagement, or capital improvements. Other motivations for this project were to address the increasing demand to the mountain, which is contributing to more congestion and some safety concerns on all of those corridors. Next slide. In terms of our project goals, we did have 4 primary project goals. Of course, we're going to show you what the regional vision looks like, but we also were seeking to develop essentially a framework for guided action that would be used by our partners to, in a coordinated manner into the future. It was essentially, I would call it a facilitated platform for partners to collaborate, partner together, and sort through which agency would be poised and positioned for implementation or chipping away at the vision over this long-term horizon. And finally, the other purpose and goal for the project was to lift the findings, if you will, the projects from this transit vision and bring them into the Mount Hood Multimodal transportation plan, which Mr. Winsheimer communicated will be kicked off this month. That implementation plan is for implementable projects. The Vision Around the Mountain was very aspirational and fiscally unconstrained, whereas the Mount Hood Multimodal plan is fiscally constrained and focused on implementation. So we're going to marry these two together and work towards the next 5 years of implementation for transit. So this graphic is just simply a representation of how the project moves through the life cycle from idea generation, develop kind of more of a framework of how these elements fit together, and then merging planned projects with concepts into this unified vision. Again, another graphic in case you're curious about what does vision framework mean. It's essentially how all these things work together, all these elements. So on the top, you have the aspirational statement of intent. It's the vision. And then the vision principle is essentially the legs from which this project stands on. It's the components of the vision and a lot of belief statements. We believe that these are values of the project. Of course, there's goals, goal statements, and then there's a number of strategies enumerating how we achieve the vision and a list of implementation actions to consider. So here's the vision statement. It is, I want to bring you a reference. I'm not going to read it, but of note the reference to serving multiple constituents. That was a very important priority for stakeholders, whether it be visitors to the area, recreation users, individuals who desire to use transit to access employment on or off the mountain, even residents in the travel corridors. The stakeholders believed it was important this vision statement articulate those important elements. In addition to the vision, it was also a staple element to support economic development and provide means to support public safety, and of course, ensuring the mountain ecosystem is protected and preserved in perpetuity. So if you're curious what's in there, there's a lot packed in. There's a lot of information and more that I could even attempt to convey tonight. But generally, there are 9 vision principles. As I mentioned, these are the legs of the project. They were designed to represent the values, as I mentioned before. So we have 9 priority principles, and there's 17 actually goal statements, not goal areas, that kind of nest into there and support that. So, for example, under user experience, the principle articulated, we believe a customer-focused, convenient, and enjoyable transit service will change the travel behavior of existing users and new users. And a goal statement under that particular area was provide passengers with access to dependable and efficient transit service. The list is very robust, and I just want to give you a flavor of how some of that is articulated.
Thank you.
In the framework, there's also strategies. There's a number of different strategies that were categorized and grouped according to these 8 general areas: governance, routes, service operations, etc., etc. So I want to note here that I have only 3 slides left, and this is one of them. A substantial amount of stakeholder participation focused on what was the operations. That's where a lot of the energy gravitated towards. And this is an attempt to articulate essentially what the operational vision is for this particular vision to and around Mount Hood. So there's a lot of information here. There's a lot of dots, there's a lot of lines, but I'll do my best to share that there are multiple transit operators that comprise this transportation system. All these operators are funded from different resources, different governments, different districts, whatnot, but in totality, they provide this transit system that is seeking to provide both express, which means few stops, as well as local service, which means multiple stops at multiple destinations. There is a very, very strong support for a circulation system up on the mountain. Currently, we have operators traveling to the mountain and back down, but now the operation looks to have a circulation system where these local operators can connect to. And to do that, we need transit hubs, park and rides, and we also need a fare system that is connected and reciprocal amongst agencies, which requires technology as well as intergovernmental agreements. Additionally, the kit keeps going, real-time information, easily accessible to the traveling public, and ultimately a cooperatively branded system that all operators that will be a part of. Of note here, though, I do want to make note here that the intent here is not to change the brand or the purpose of existing systems. That is not what this project was about, but rather stitching these pieces together to make a cohesive system to and around Mount Hood. So in terms of the framework for action, this is essentially our frame out of all the actionable items related to those 8 categories I talked to you before. And essentially, the framework for action is intended to move the needle towards that vision. There's a lot in the vision, and this is an attempt to group the actions according to terms. And those terms would be essentially immediate, near, and the conceptual ideas that aren't necessarily rooted or grounded yet and need more work and planning to be done. Ultimately, all these actions are optional, and they come with implementation ideas as well as potential partners that would be a part of achieving the vision. So that concludes. I'd just like to thank our partners and participants. Some that are in this room tonight. Really appreciate the support. But this has been a great project, and we look forward to the Mount Hood Multimodal Plan update, which is going to work on our implementation steps. So with that, I'll take questions.
Gee, do I go to Ryan? Do you first? And I see Jason. Ryan, do you really want to ask a question?
I can wait.
Okay, it's up to you. Jason, would you go ahead, please?
Yeah, on the bus on shoulder project, I guess I wanted to understand SMART's goal around a 10% improvement. I'm a little more of a data analytics guy, so when I hear that, I don't know whether that means we're talking about taking the 2X's on-time performance from 10% to 20% or 80% to 90%, or do they mean 10% improvement on what its current performance is? So from 20% to 22%, like those words were in my mind from an analytics and data perspective, pretty not specific.
Understood. Thank you for the question, and I will do my best to respond, and then I'll get clarification from our representatives at SMART. But my understanding, they're looking to narrow in on your examples. They're looking to move on-time performance from the 2X from, say, 80% to 90%. And I don't have those numbers directly in front of me. I actually think their on-time performance was slightly lower than the 80%.
Does that answer it? Great, thank you, Jason. Ryan, I see you, but I don't see another one. Go ahead, please. Oh, and then Paul.
Mike Oates and Paul Savis both have their hands up as well. Well, I can wait till after them.
Okay, which one did you see first? How about Mike? We don't hear from Mike a lot.
Thanks, Chair. Jason, one question when you were showing the first situation where you have the bus on the shoulder and it looks like a great idea. My first thought is where do the disabled vehicles go if you're going to use the shoulder? Because it didn't look like there was any other place for them to go on that road.
Yeah, the disabled vehicles will continue to use the shoulder. That is a priority use. I would look at it this way. Transit usage is the last priority on the shoulder. So emergency use always takes priority. So if there is a disabled vehicle that needs to use the shoulder or is in the shoulder, the transit operator is required to merge back into the general purpose lane. Now, in the instance that there's a disabled vehicle and a transit vehicle at the same time, that presents a unique scenario, and the transit operators will have to utilize their training. I'm not aware that's happened before, but certainly that could be something that we have to consider in the future.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, one of the things I was going to mention when at the beginning of this is that we've actually been piloting this already. So we have been working this with CTRAN up on the bridge of 205 between Washington State and Oregon, and we've had the benefit of trying out exactly the kinds of concerns, Commissioner Oates, that you mentioned. They've merged back in successfully when there's a tire in the way or when a law enforcement vehicle's over there using it, and so we've actually had the opportunity to test it. What we call our concept of operations, and have found it to be highly successful. We have not had any safety related issues, which is always a concern, particularly as Jason described, when you have somebody moving down the shoulder unexpectedly. So that's why we're trying to get some media attention out. We're going to be having a ribbon cutting with SMART here in the next few weeks, and starting to try to let the public know that that's happening as well. So the good news is we have a pilot that's been going with C-Tran up above, and I'm particularly excited to see how this one works with SMART. And Mayor Snyder, you know, your point about on-time performance, and I'm just thinking in terms of travel time savings. As folks who drive that route, it's congested a majority of the time. Anytime between 3 p.m. and 7, you're going to see some level of congestion there. And this is an opportunity for transit to really take advantage of some unused space and improve this travel time. So I'm particularly excited about it. Okay, now I'll let it go.
And I didn't see the other hands, Ryan, that you mentioned. I know Paul, but is there another one?
Nope, that's
He's
it.
the only one I see.
Okay. Hi, Paul. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge all the providers and those involved really in both these programs. Of course, SMART has been working with some of our other local providers to look at transit service along I-205, bus on shoulder. And this one pilot project's the beginning of that. So we're really pleased and proud of the work of our providers. But on the Vision Around the Mountain, where we have a number of providers, I mean, I think what gets missed due to the influence of the larger cities, Portland and this area, the rural areas don't get a lot of investment and funds for service like this. So this is a great opportunity where partnerships and collaboration really provide, ideally, a means for people that don't have the financial means, don't have a car, don't have or can't afford Uber to go to the gorge or go to the falls or go to Mount Hood or Timberline. So we've been very successful in Clackamas County in investing in getting transit up to the mountain, both for the workforce and for people of all different incomes and for convenience sake. So it's more of a shout out. I just want to acknowledge everyone and having this more holistic, visionary look at all of it. And one thing that wasn't mentioned is housing, workforce housing. There's a lot of people that are employed up and around that area, whether it's the falls or it's the ski resorts. But here we have this icon. A lot of people see it, but they don't have the means to get there. Just really proud of all the work that everyone's done to make this happen. So we'll get there. We're making headway on this Vision Around the Mountain to make it more complete. We got a ways to go, but we're getting there. So I just want to just do a shout out and a thank you to everyone who's been involved.
Thank you, Paul. Just a quick check. I think that includes everybody. If it does, Paul, I want to say something to you.
Andy has her hand up.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Andy, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I just want to, as a co-sponsor of the Vision Around the Mountain, I just want to say thank you to the other providers and also to ODOT and Jason. Great job, not only presenting tonight, but great job on the process. For those who may not be aware, the City of Sandy and Clackamas County together have provided a pulse service, meaning that we operate and schedule together to provide seamless transportation to the mountains since 2013. So it's this process of what we just went through to broaden the idea of those transportation options for this entire region was not only a really exciting process, but it was constructive and identified improvements and expansions, funding opportunities, and so forth that really allows us providers to go out and make the needed adjustments for the system and for those who use the system. So thank you.
Andy. Now, did I miss anybody? Did you see Ryan? Chris? Okay. One quick comment from me, and this is to Paul, you, and to Mike up in Hood River. One of the reasons that this group was formed is because there wasn't a voice for folks in the rural nor in Hood River County. And I just want to compliment you both for being in such good attendance. I compliment you in regard to these projects that I hear about that I really down in my neck of the woods don't hear about much. And it's important. And I think if we're going to be collectively a larger area than just, a small very urban area, if we are collectively talking with one voice, it's very powerful. And so your vendors there, Paul, and you know, all of the transit folks are doing a great job. And I know Mike up in Hood River, you guys are doing the same thing. I mean, it's just outstanding work. And I really think that you have hit a home run, both of you, in regards to why this committee was formed. So I'll stop with that. But we have a little bit, and I appreciate everybody being tolerant tonight so we can get back online. We're having a bit of a problem figuring out when the next meeting is going to be in terms of the mobility conversation that we're having. We called the toll program by ODOT, but we had a request that the first Monday didn't work, and we do the first Wednesday, and I suspect that we're going to have problems on that as well. So, either Chris or Ryan, do you want to talk about that for a moment before we adjourn, please?
I think it's just there was an email that went out last week from the toll program. It came from Scott Keeler. Asked for responses by the end of Wednesday. If you can say whether the first Monday or the first Wednesday of the month will work best for you, and then they will figure out from there. And again, this is offsetting from the regular ACT meetings that we've already scheduled that are on the even months. Our next meeting is December 6th.
And you're just going to take a compilation of those, and whatever gets the highest number, is that what's going to happen, or do you know?
I look forward to the toll program working that out.
Okay. I don't blame you a bit. I think that concludes it. Again, I appreciate everybody's tolerance. Sometimes the technology doesn't work as well as we'd like to, and since we're not meeting in person, we can't sit there and just continue to talk. So thank you all, and that concludes our evening. So see you next time. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Bye.